Welcome to the podcast that discusses storytelling from all angles to help you and us answer the call when the muse screams, "Tell the damn story." We'll be exploring the challenges of being creative in fiction, illustration, comics, film, and nonfiction. All right, gentlemen, we're going to talk about tonight when reality knocks us down like a tsunami. When the outside world so invades us that it can't help but seep through somewhere to our creativity. We're talking about so many things, but most recently the shooting of a South Carolina church where people were just in Bible class. They would that's all they were doing. They were in Bible class. And there is no reason. They just opened fire. And we were talking before the show, let's see, Ferguson, Staten Island, Baltimore, the Texas pool, the second pool, now South Carolina, and I am sure that I am missing some of them. What do you got to say about all this violence, guys?
I just want to jump in and say that when I heard about the church and the shooting and everything, my mind immediately, maybe because it's the South or so, my mind immediately went back to the bombing of a church over 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and two little girls being killed, and again, hate crime and so forth. It's like, sometimes you get that feeling that, did we learn anything? And when I say we, I don't mean did black people learn anything or did white people learn anything. Did people learn anything? Did we come forward at all? Did we gain any ground? Did somehow whatever we might have learned dissipate or dissolve or got shoved under the rug, over the past 10 years? And so we're back to the same point again, where this kind of nonsense, is acceptable in somebody's mind, and again, whether it's a hate crime, i.e., color or culture, because what's going on in the Dominican Republic right now is on my mind too. With suddenly people deciding that Haitians don't belong there anymore, and that it's okay to do the stormtrooper thing and kick in their doors and throw their women to the streets and smash what pathetic goods and items they may have. All of this just harkens back in time to so many different places that I asked myself this morning, did we learn anything? What are we up to? What is it that keeps bringing some portion of society back to this ugly, foul place? And I have thoughts about it, but that was the first impression that hit me, was all of this avalanche, this tsunami, this storm of hatred and violence and death.
Well, while Tim reboots, we're going to keep talking. Before any of this happened, every once in a while, I have to have Richard Pryor week in my car. I have this amazing box set. It's all the stuff he's done, and I understand Richard Pryor talks a lot about drugs, talks a lot about sex, but he also talks a lot about social commentary.
He never stopped. Yeah, I agree.
And he late 60s, early 70s, right? Those were when his albums came out. And I'm listening to album after album after album where he makes some reference that is relevant this year. He makes a couple of jokes, and he's a comedian. He makes jokes, but they're biting social commentary at the same time. He was one of the very best. And he talks about a chokehold. He talks about guns and cops shooting African Americans, although that wasn't the term at the time. Um, it knocked me out of the comedy every time. I mean, you still recognize the humor, but oh my God, it's as if he's talking today. And you were talking about the church where the two girls died 40 years ago. I'm talking about the late 60s, 70s, which is, hey, Tim, welcome back.
All right, sorry.
We were just talking about, I happened to be listening to Richard Pryor this week and how relevant his social commentary. I mean, yes, he did a lot of drug jokes, a lot of sex jokes, but his social commentary about police chokeholds and gunfire and stuff, how relevant it is, especially this week, especially today. And I was tying it into what Alex said about the church bombing.
Right.
That was the early 60s.
Right.
Pryor's talking in the early 70s. It's Rodney King, right? In what was that late 80s?
Mm-hmm.
Late 80s, early 90s. There's a through line. I don't think we can let any era off the hook. But the past is what it is. That's the past. We can't change it. What I'm really interested in talking about today is why now. What is it about today's world that this seems to be making such a furious comeback?
You want me to say speak on this?
I hope you would. Yeah.
I'll say, yeah. For me, first of all, I'm a lover. I'm not a fighter. So there are certain things.
Now he's quoting Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah, no, I'm a lover. I'm not a fighter. So there's certain things that I understand that will be done and must be done. Some things I'm going to engage in. Some things I'm not going to engage in. I'm an artist. I can tell you what it looks like. I used to run away from that at one point because I've been told by some folks that, okay, well, when you're in a period where you're under a great deal of social upheaval, that art is kind of like not important. It's about, are you willing to pick up a gun or whatever. I got a gun. It's called a Wacom stylus, and it will allow me to show you what liberation looks like. So that's the first one.
Well, Tim, maybe you save us from circling in the hurt here by saying that. What do you do artistically when these things, I mean, how does your creativity challenge a Ferguson or a Baltimore or a South Carolina shooting?
All right. Well, the first thing let's recognize that what's happening has been happening all the time. This is not
throughout history.
Yes, but I'm just talking about within the context of the United States, the 20th century, moving into the 21st century. This has been happening for decades. The only difference now is these things. You can now record them. So technology has changed. In that racism and racist activity is now literally able to be recorded. It still doesn't keep the young black girl clad in the bikini from being sat on by an police officer during a pool party. It still doesn't keep the apparently white woman who has lived for decades as a black woman to claim now that she identifies as black. So all I'm saying is that what technology and the period we're in now is just bringing a lot of these things that have always occurred to light. So that's a good thing. As an artist, because it is my job to essentially react visually and narratively to these things that are going on, it's my job to take those elements, put them in my stories, whether it be satirical, whether it be action, or that I choose to utilize. It is my job to integrate those things into my narratives and to tell those stories, whether it be whatever genre. So that's my job.
let me follow up on that. It's fascinating take, and I thank you for this. Um, because we do have these, right? And we're getting a lot more visuals than we have in the past, right? The pool party, there was a second pool situation the other day, the Staten Island chokehold. We got that through technology. Does that inform your visualization?
Sure, it does. It's interesting. There's a book that Rosarium Publishing is putting out called APB, and we were asked to submit work. And one of the projects I've submitted was a project called Walkman that I did back in 1988. And this project was done for Hunter College. It was one of my first paid comic book narrative jobs. It was actually before I broke into the mainstream industry. And it was basically dealing with a guy.
Let us get a little look at it.
Yeah, it's basically a guy who was a courier, a messenger, who gets shot by a Jewish guy on a train because when he was attempting to ask for the time, the guy thought he was trying to mug him. So okay. This was a story I did back in the 1980s. I don't know if it's going to make the book or anything. It almost doesn't even matter. But this was my reaction to being an African-American male in the late 80s. And now here we are, 30 years later, same thing happening. And just the difference is now is that where I was using the comic book medium or the comic format to tell something that's very real, now here we are with cell phones. Cell phones are storytellers. They're storytelling devices. That's what they are.
Excellent, excellent. Alex. You are, you're most known. I mean, for Scooby-Doo, you're known for Archie, but also Blackjack, and he's from the 40s. Where do you go with this stuff? Or does it create a new character, or do you put a reflection of it as we've been doing with the new anthology?
I think I always say again, an artist brings to the table his or her life experiences and their point of view and all those things, and that's what influences your work and subsequently makes your story about someone's struggle slightly different from the 30 million others that have been done. I spent a good deal of my life, whether I was telling jokes or telling stories or drawing pictures or writing. My point of view has always been that as an African American male or a black man or, depending on the era, a Negro, there's a certain amount of my life experience is going to influence what I do and how I react to things. And then there's all the rest of me that is looking at the world as a larger picture. And when I look at the violence and the things that are happening to black people, I can't ignore the violence and the insanity that's being done by black people. I can't ignore the insanity that's being done by whites on whites. And so, it's again, when they were saying that kids in the urban areas were carrying guns and shooting each other and everything, I was remembering that white kids in the Midwest were sucking on rifles and blowing their own brains out because life was that hard. So to me, I see the human condition as suffering. And I try as a writer, when I approach certain stories that deal with violence, obviously Scooby-Doo and Archie, the stories that I've written do not. But, Archie being shot in Life with Archie, as that series came to an end, him jumping in front of someone who's trying to shoot a friend of his. The Archie characters dying in Afterlife with Archie. Death is now entering even that candy-coated arena. And so when I try and tell stories, whether it's with comedy or whether it's Blackjack, I try and look at what story am I telling? Am I telling a story about violence, or am I telling a story about something that's happening to black people, or am I telling a story about something that's happening to other people of color? Is it what story am I telling? How do I feel about that thing? What do I want my audience to get from it? What do I want them to feel? And I believe, ultimately one of the reasons that Blackjack exists for me, the reason I created him, is that I believe that we should never be without heroes. I think that there always has to be, whether it's real life or fictional, there need to be some characters out there, some people who out there who show us a better way or show us what sacrifice really means. In the church shooting, one of the people who died threw himself in front of his relative, his aunt or his grandmother. Unfortunately they both died. But his first thought was not about saving me. It was about saving someone he loved. And so I think those things need to be remembered and the light needs to be shined on them far more than the constant regurgitation of the garbage that cowards and fools and insane human beings do to one another or to the innocent. So for me, telling a story about someone who strives against that kind of thing is always more appealing to me than some of the other kind of tales that I'm being bombarded with, in the things that I read or see in the films.
All right, let me push a little further.
Sure. Shove away.
While I was watching coverage of the Baltimore situation, a guy on the street was interviewed, and reporters asking him, "Well, why are these kids out here throwing bottles and rocks and at the police officers?" And he said, "You have to understand, this is not a reaction to today or a reaction to this week. This is a reaction to decades and decades and decades of being in a hopeless situation and being ignored, no matter what efforts we made." And that struck me because I'm really a big fan of, now I'm going to forget his name, the creator of Homicide: Life on the Streets.
David,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I forget his name, but yes.
It's coming. But it was Homicide: Life on the Streets, and then The Corner, and then The Wire, all of which chronicle exactly what this guy on the streets is talking about in Baltimore. All of those stories were told in Baltimore. The entertainment light was shining on Baltimore for 20 years, maybe 25 years now, if we go back to the beginning of Homicide. And he's right, nothing had changed. You went back and I watched some early episodes of Homicide, checked The Wire again, that kind of stuff. The conditions that this guy was talking about as having led to the explosion of Baltimore, it was all documented.
Right.
So what do you do as creators of heroic stories in the face of a society that will let a problem like that fester and not give attention to, and allow racism to be institutionalized in that way? And not just Baltimore. You know that as well as I do. But what do we do in the face of that as creatives?
I would say Alex and I had a conversation not about, because this was, I guess, early this week, and we were just talking about how African American cartoonists, whether you're a writer or artist or artist, writer or whatever, basically, is it set up for us to be successful within the mainstream industry? Now, you asked, well, how do you deal with creating in an environment where something like Baltimore systemic racism exists? And it's almost like, at least for me, I kind of operate knowing that, okay, it's not set up for me. It's a bit sobering when you realize, well, it's really not set up for me. But those voices have to get out. And a David Chase and a Paul Antonaggio, however you pronounce his name, those guys are doing not just a great public service, but they're doing a great art service. You know, they're creating great art, but there's still. It's almost like you have to make your market to get your work out, to give your response to a Baltimore. You have to go on 125th Street, if you will. We'll talk about this at another time, but that's the way I combat that. I try to recognize that these things happen. Creating the work is the least difficult part, is getting the work out.
I would also say that, you know, and again, to play with the title of our story, you know, it becomes the job of not only an artist, but it becomes the job of an activist,
Right.
To always tell the story, to keep
Right.
telling the story, because otherwise it gets forgotten.
Right.
You know, I can remember someone saying to me, an quote-unquote educated individual saying to me during the Bosnia incident when the mass graves were found, I can't believe people would do that's impossible. No one would do that. And I remember sitting there thinking, as this person said that, did you sleep through history class? Because World War II was not that long ago. At that point, it was only 30, 40 years before. You know, did you miss that? How do you not understand that we are always capable of that? What's happening in Africa? What's happening in the West Indies? All these things. Human beings have always been capable of it. The trick is to not let that be forgotten as you attempt to raise better human beings, as you attempt to build a better society. As artists, our jobs are to reflect life, whether we do it through humor or cartoons or film or radio or prose, novels, poetry, spoken word, whatever it is, we reflect life. And how it affects us comes through our work, whether it's an angry voice or a humorous voice or a gentle voice, if it's said with love or if it's said with more hate. You know, that's our job, is to keep telling that story so that someone learns from it. There's no way I believe in my heart, which I'm told is a huge thing, there's no way I believe that I'm going to affect the entire world. But I know my work has affected others. I know because the children I worked with when they were younger have grown to adulthood and have come back and talked to me and shown me. The people that have read some of my work have come back, have found me at conventions or whatever and told me what it meant and told me this and told me that. The people that I'm surrounded with, gentlemen included, but also the people who work with me in the Kids Comic-Con and some of the places we go, we know our work is being heard and seen, and our feelings have been felt. And I think for me anyway, because I know, Tim, you've got your way of approaching this, for me, even though I'm not a religious man, I believe I continue to have faith in the fact that my job as a human being here on this planet is to continue to strive towards making things better. I brought 3 kids into this world, and I'll be damned if I'm going to sit down and let all this garbage go on and not do something to try and make the world better for them. Yeah. That's what I'm here for. And as an artist, I use the tools and skills that I was blessed with.
I want to go to an example. David Simon did Homicide. David Chase was the Sopranos guy. David Simon did Homicide and The Wire and all that.
Paul Antonaggio, I think, was the creator.
Who?
Paul Antonaggio.
Who was the creator of one of the shows?
Homicide.
Okay.
Well, we'll go with David Simon from The Wire, because that's the example I want to use. They open up the entire series, and the point I'll make my point after I tell the anecdote. They open the entire series on a dead teenager, and he's got a witness. The detective has a witness, and he's saying, "Well, you know who this is." He says, "Yeah, that's Snot Boogie." He says, "That's what you call this guy, Snot Boogie?" I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, he says, "Well, what happened?" He says, "He stole the money from the crap game." He stole the money from the crap game, so you shot him? He says, "Well, Snot Boogie would steal it every week." He says, "What do you mean he'd steal it every week?" He said, "He'd come in every Friday, play a little bit, and then when the pile of cash got big, he'd snatch it and run. And this time someone got angry and shot him. So the detective goes, wait a minute, if Snob Boogie stole the money every week and you knew he stole the money every week, why'd you let him play? The kid looks at him and says, you gotta let him play. It's like, why? He goes, this is America. And that's how that whole series opened up, you know? That little detail, that little insight into beliefs and standards, you know, of these street kids, you know, and it humanized the series immediately. It established the street kids who are so easily written off as, you know, having a point of view and having some pride and having some perspective, whether it was the healthiest for them or not, of course, debatable and all that sort of stuff. But perhaps that's one of the things we can offer. We are calling it the story, the show, Tell the Damn Story. Maybe that's one of the ways we can talk about is, you know, it's in the details where you get to bring out a moment, because you know, as humorous as Snot Boogie is, and as stunning as that, you know, This is America was, it also was a real tone setter, you know, and maybe that's one of the things we can offer those who watch about, you know, how you tell the damn story in the face of such a continuing onslaught of, you know, yeah, I know, smartphone captured racist mayhem in you know, this great country of ours.
I was, you know, I don't remember the year that it occurred, but, you know, in Columbine, the Columbine shooting, when the three, and I, again, just to be specific, the three white teenagers went into their own high school in Middle America, trench coats and all, and shot up and killed several of their friends and teachers. And I remember, you know, the upset over that. I mean, you know, innocence destroyed and so many other elements that were stated, and it was a shock because at that point we hadn't seen a lot of that. And
since then we've seen about 90.
Yeah, and I don't want to see any more, but there you go. I remember my way of dealing with it, one of the ways, was it became a blackjack story, a short story, except that instead of its high school students in the Midwest, it was young mobsters' sons trying to prove how tough they were in the middle of Grand Central Station in New York. And it's a hero, unarmed, going up against three armed men who are mowing down all of these innocent people. And, you know, is that an honest telling of that specific tale? You know, did I show that, you know, these people were murdered and these kids, you know, were caught? And did I do? No, I took the essence of the tragedy and told that story through the victims and through the hero, and moved on to tell the next story.
And through
but I need to take that moment,
right?
Yeah, I mean, because
prism,
again, you're commenting just like we're doing now. We're sitting and commenting on this, and whereas people who maybe aren't writers or photographers or illustrators would sit and discuss this in a group or with a friend, you know, the difference for us is we can also, after filtering that through us, or discussing it with fellow artists, we can turn around and use our art to comment on it, or reflect it, or display it, or rail against it. And even you and Tim, you know, you're working on that piece, Red Star. Again,
Revolt of the Red Star.
Yes, exactly. And again, the telling of that story, the way you wrote it, which I read it, by the way, the way you wrote it and Tim's art come together to take a heinous situation, which in real life is being repeated and repeated and repeated in several countries right now, and giving that story its moment, and giving those people, I don't want to say more than to say, telling their story and giving them something to deal with in the middle and the end of that story that says so much. Does it solve all these problems? No, it doesn't, but it tells that story. It's a moment in life, in history, where it tells that story. So I think, again, when whether again you're doing comic books, or you're doing a novel, or you're doing a play, you always have to filter it through you. And sometimes you'll get assignments where you're being told what to write because that's paying the bills. But other times when you have the moments like you've had with City of Sin and Woe and some other things you've done, and Tim has with Maddie's Rocket, and I have with Blackjack and a couple of other things I've done, Sherlock, Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello. You get to tell something that happens, something that matters, how you feel about it. You get to bring information to light, and I think you get to stand a little taller because you did that. I certainly feel that we make some sort of effort, as I said earlier, to try and do something to make this world a little bit better.
If you want to hear more about the show or any of us, go to tellthedamnstory.com.